Sarah Chin sat quietly in seat 14C, just another passenger sipping water and avoiding small talk. Nobody knew the woman in the navy blazer was Major Phoenix Chin, a decorated F-16 pilot with 150 combat missions. When crisis struck at 35,000 feet, her secret would change everything forever. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The engines of Flight 447 hummed quietly as the Boeing 737 cruised smoothly at 35,000 feet through clear blue skies. Sunlight streamed through the small cabin windows as passengers settled in for what they expected to be a routine 3-hour flight from Denver to Phoenix. In seat 14C, Sarah Chin looked like any other business traveler. She wore a simple navy blazer over jeans, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. A laptop bag rested under the seat in front of her. Nothing about her appearance suggested she was anything more than another passenger heading home or traveling for work. When flight attendant Jenny wheeled her drink cart down the aisle and stopped at row 14, she smiled warmly and asked what Sarah would like to drink. Sarah requested just water and thanked her politely. Jenny made small talk, asking if Sarah was flying for business or pleasure. Sarah replied that it was a little of both, explaining she was visiting family in Phoenix. Jenny commented that family time was important before moving on to the next row. Mr. Thompson, a talkative salesman in his 50s sitting beside Sarah, couldn't help but strike up a conversation. He noticed she was traveling alone and asked if she was on a business trip. Sarah answered vaguely, saying it was something like that. When he mentioned he worked in insurance and asked about her line of work, Sarah paused briefly before saying she did government work, describing it as pretty boring stuff. Mr. Thompson nodded knowingly, saying he understood how it felt to push papers all day. Sarah agreed and turned her attention back to her magazine, hoping to end the conversation. Across the aisle, Lisa Martinez bounced her fussy toddler on her knee. She apologized to Sarah for the noise, explaining her son didn't like flying. Sarah told her not to worry, that kids would be kids. Lisa asked if Sarah was a mother and Sarah said not yet, maybe someday. Lisa commented that Sarah seemed really good with children and very calm under pressure. Sarah smiled but didn't respond, though if Lisa only knew how much real pressure Sarah had faced in her life. The truth was that Sarah Chin wasn't just any government worker. She was Major Sarah Phoenix Chin, one of the most decorated F-16 fighter pilots in the United States Air Force. She had flown over 150 combat missions across 3 different war zones. Her call sign Phoenix had been earned after she survived a direct missile hit over enemy territory, managed to keep her severely damaged F-16 flying for 40 minutes with half her aircraft systems destroyed, and somehow brought it back to base for a safe landing. Her fellow pilots still talked about that impossible flight in hushed, reverent tones. But today she was determined to be just another passenger in seat 14C. She was traveling to Phoenix to visit her sister and wanted nothing more than a peaceful, anonymous flight. She was tired of the stares and endless questions that came whenever people discovered her military service. She was tired of explaining what combat missions were really like or being asked the uncomfortable question of whether she had ever killed anyone. For once in her life, she just wanted to blend in and be treated like a normal person taking a normal flight. In the cockpit, Captain David Wright and First Officer Mike Torres monitored their instruments as the aircraft maintained its smooth cruise through the clear morning sky. Wright, a veteran pilot in his mid-40s, commented that the weather looked perfect all the way to Phoenix and they should have a smooth flight. Torres, 8 years younger and still relatively new to commercial aviation, agreed enthusiastically. After dealing with severe turbulence on yesterday's flight that had left passengers sick and shaken, he said he would gladly take a boring, uneventful trip any day of the week. Wright was adjusting his headset when a crackling voice came through the radio from Denver Center. The air traffic controller advised Flight 447 that they were tracking an unidentified aircraft somewhere in their vicinity and instructed them to maintain their current heading and altitude. Wright acknowledged the transmission and asked for more details about the unknown aircraft. Denver Center responded that they had no additional information at that time but were sending military assets to investigate the situation. They emphasized that the commercial flight should just continue normal operations. Wright and Torres exchanged concerned glances. Torres asked quietly if they should inform the passengers about the potential issue. Wright decided against it for now, saying it could turn out to be nothing and there was no point in worrying people unnecessarily. They would wait to see how the situation developed before making any announcements. High above the commercial airliner, 2 F-16 Fighting Falcons streaked across the brilliant blue sky, their powerful engines leaving thin white contrails in their wake. The lead aircraft was piloted by Captain Jake "Viper" Harrison, a 32-year-old combat veteran with multiple deployments. Flying wing position was Lieutenant Alex "Hawk" Rodriguez, 28 years old and eager to prove himself as a reliable wingman. Inside his F-16 cockpit, Captain Harrison scanned his radar display while maintaining constant radio contact with ground control. He radioed Denver Center that they were approaching the coordinates provided but had no visual contact with the unknown aircraft yet. His wingman Hawk came over the radio to report he was picking up something on his scope, bearing 240 degrees and climbing through 30,000 feet altitude. Viper confirmed he could see the target on his own radar and informed Denver Center they had contact with the unknown aircraft and were moving to intercept. The two F-16s banked hard to the left, their incredible maneuverability allowing them to change direction almost instantly. The sudden turn created intense G-forces that pressed both pilots deep into their seats, but they were well trained to handle such stress. Within seconds, they were racing toward the mysterious aircraft that had appeared on their radar screens. Back aboard the commercial flight, Sarah was quietly reading her magazine when she noticed the plane make a subtle course correction. Her finely tuned senses, developed through years of military flying, immediately picked up the slight change in engine tone and the aircraft's attitude. She glanced out her window but couldn't see anything unusual in the empty sky around them. Mr. Thompson, less experienced with aircraft operations, asked if they had just turned. Sarah told him they had turned slightly, probably just to avoid weather ahead, but she knew better than that. What she had just felt wasn't a weather avoidance maneuver at all. The precise nature of the course change, the way the pilots had executed it, and the timing all pointed to one thing. This was a military-directed course adjustment. Someone in air traffic control had ordered this deviation for reasons related to national security or military operations. Sarah's pulse quickened slightly, though she was careful to keep her expression completely calm and neutral. In the cockpit, Denver Center came back on the radio with new instructions. They told Flight 447 to deviate 10 degrees to the right of their current course due to military operations taking place in their area. Captain Wright acknowledged the instruction and began turning the aircraft to the new heading while First Officer Torres monitored all the radio frequencies for additional information. They could hear military communications bleeding through on the emergency channels, confirming Wright's suspicion that something significant was happening nearby. Torres commented that it sounded like they were scrambling fighter jets for some kind of operation. Wright agreed, noting that the situation must be pretty serious if air traffic control was moving commercial aircraft around to make room for military operations. Both pilots had enough experience to know that such measures weren't taken lightly. The unknown aircraft finally came into clear view as the F-16s closed the distance. It was a small single-engine Cessna, but something was clearly wrong with it. The aircraft wasn't responding to any radio calls, its transponder had been turned off, and its flight path seemed erratic and uncontrolled. Viper and Hawk moved into position on either side of the small plane to get a better look at what was happening. Captain Harrison flew his F-16 close enough to the Cessna to peer into its cockpit. What he saw immediately explained the aircraft's strange behavior. He radioed Denver Center to report that they had visual contact with the unknown aircraft, identifying it as a single-engine Cessna with no visible tail number. More importantly, the aircraft was not responding to calls on the guard emergency frequency, and the pilot appeared to be slumped over the controls, apparently unconscious or incapacitated. Denver Center asked if Viper could determine the pilot's condition more precisely. After flying even closer to the small plane and getting a better look, Viper confirmed that this appeared to be a medical emergency. The pilot was definitely unconscious, and the unmanned aircraft was now flying on autopilot or simply drifting on its last course setting. They needed to guide the Cessna away from civilian air traffic immediately before it caused a collision or crashed into populated areas below. Denver Center acknowledged the report and informed Viper that there was a commercial airliner in the vicinity, Flight 447, a Boeing 737, that would need to be escorted to safety while the F-16s dealt with the runaway Cessna. Viper understood the situation and directed his wingman Hawk to take escort position with the commercial aircraft while he remained with the small plane to monitor its movement and prevent it from becoming a threat to anyone on the ground. Through her window, Sarah's trained eyes spotted a dark speck in the distance that was rapidly growing larger as it approached their aircraft. She immediately identified it as an F-16 fighter jet based on its distinctive silhouette and flight characteristics. She watched with professional interest as the military pilot approached the commercial airliner and smoothly took up a protective escort position off their left wing, maintaining perfect formation despite the significant speed difference between the two aircraft types. Other passengers began noticing the fighter jet's presence, and panic started to spread through the cabin. One passenger pointed out the window and asked loudly if that was really a fighter jet flying next to them. Others craned their necks to get a better look, and worried murmurs filled the cabin as people tried to understand what was happening. The atmosphere quickly shifted from relaxed to tense as passengers realized this wasn't a normal situation. Flight attendant Jenny came over the intercom to address the growing concern among the passengers. She asked everyone to remain calm and explained that they were experiencing what she called a minor air traffic situation. The military aircraft visible outside their windows was simply providing an escort as a safety precaution, nothing more. She tried to sound reassuring, but her voice betrayed some nervousness about the unusual circumstances. Mr. Thompson turned to Sarah with obvious worry written across his face. He said this didn't look minor to him at all and asked if she had ever seen anything like this before. Sarah stared at the F-16 maintaining perfect formation with their aircraft, noting details that most passengers would never notice. The weapons configuration, the pilot's skill level evident in his smooth flying, and the professional way he was executing the escort mission. She lied smoothly, telling Mr. Thompson she had never seen anything like it either, though the truth was she had been on both sides of this exact situation many times during her military career. In the cockpit, Denver Center contacted Flight 447 to officially inform them they now had military escort for their protection. The controller emphasized that they should continue on their current heading and not be alarmed by the presence of the fighter aircraft accompanying them. Captain Wright acknowledged the transmission and asked if Denver Center could provide any additional details about the situation they were dealing with. The air traffic controller explained briefly that there was an unresponsive aircraft in their area and the escort was purely precautionary to ensure the safety of all civilian traffic. Wright noticed that his radio was picking up military communications on adjacent frequencies. He adjusted his headset to listen more carefully to what the fighter pilots were saying, hoping to get a better understanding of what was really happening out there. The situation with the unconscious pilot in the Cessna was becoming more critical by the minute. The small aircraft had entered a shallow dive and was heading directly toward the outskirts of Phoenix, where thousands of people lived and worked. Viper flew alongside the runaway plane, frantically trying different radio frequencies in an attempt to wake up the incapacitated pilot before the situation became truly catastrophic. Captain Harrison transmitted on multiple emergency frequencies, identifying himself as a U.S. Air Force fighter pilot flying on the Cessna's right wing. He asked the unknown pilot to rock his wings if he could hear the transmission, but there was no response. The small plane continued its steady descent, now passing through 28,000 feet and showing no signs of changing course or altitude. Viper contacted Denver Center with increasing urgency, reporting that the aircraft was descending through 28,000 feet and heading directly toward populated areas of Phoenix. He requested immediate guidance on rules of engagement, essentially asking for permission to take more drastic action to prevent the runaway plane from crashing into buildings or neighborhoods where it could kill innocent people on the ground. Denver Center cleared Viper to use any means necessary to prevent the aircraft from reaching populated areas, but before taking such extreme measures, they wanted to try something else first. When Viper asked what they had in mind, the controller revealed they had information indicating there was a qualified pilot aboard Flight 447. They planned to patch this pilot through to Viper on the emergency frequency to see if she could provide assistance with the crisis. Viper was surprised to hear the controller refer to the pilot as her, and asked for confirmation that they were talking about a female pilot. Denver Center confirmed this was correct and asked him to stand by while they made the connection. Viper couldn't hide his curiosity about who this mysterious female pilot might be and what qualifications she could possibly have that would be useful in this situation. On the commercial aircraft, Jenny approached Sarah's seat with a concerned expression on her face. She told Sarah she needed to come to the front of the plane because the pilots wanted to speak with her. Sarah was confused and asked why they would need to talk to her specifically. Jenny explained that air traffic control had requested Sarah by name, though she didn't know why. Mr. Thompson demanded to know what was going on and why the flight crew needed to speak with Sarah in particular. Jenny admitted she didn't have those details, but emphasized that Sarah needed to come with her immediately. Sarah unbuckled her seatbelt and followed Jenny toward the cockpit, acutely aware that every passenger in the cabin was staring at her and wondering why she was being singled out during this crisis. When Sarah entered the cockpit, Captain Wright turned to greet her with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. He introduced himself and asked directly if she was a pilot. Sarah hesitated before confirming that she was, then asked how air traffic control could possibly know about her background. Wright admitted he had no idea how they had obtained that information, but Denver Center wanted her to communicate directly with the military pilots who were dealing with the emergency situation. Wright handed Sarah a headset, and she accepted it reluctantly, knowing that once she got involved in this situation, her carefully maintained anonymity would be destroyed forever. She put on the headset and identified herself simply as the passenger from Flight 447, hoping to avoid revealing too much about her background. Denver Center immediately asked her to identify herself to the fighter pilot using her military call sign. Sarah realized she was at a crossroads. Once she revealed her call sign, every military pilot in the area would know exactly who she was, and her quiet, anonymous flight would be over. But if there were lives at stake, she couldn't remain silent. After a long pause, she sighed and spoke into the microphone. "Phoenix. This is Phoenix." The moment Captain Harrison heard that call sign over the radio, his eyes widened in complete shock. He asked for confirmation that she had just identified herself as Phoenix, as in Major Sarah Phoenix Chin. When Sarah reluctantly confirmed her identity, Viper's voice filled with respect and amazement. He identified himself as Captain Harrison, call sign Viper, and told her he had flown with her squadron during their deployment in Afghanistan. He specifically mentioned that she had saved his wingman's life during a mission over Kandahar. After a moment of stunned silence on the radio, Viper explained the current crisis to Phoenix. They had an unconscious pilot in a Cessna that was heading directly for downtown Phoenix, and he desperately needed her expertise and advice on how to handle the situation. Sarah looked out through the cockpit windows and immediately spotted the small aircraft in the distance. Her years of training and combat experience kicked in instantly as she assessed the tactical situation. Sarah keyed her microphone and spoke with the calm, professional tone that had earned her respect throughout the Air Force. She told Viper she could see the aircraft and identified it as a Cessna 172 that appeared to be dealing with a medical emergency. She estimated its altitude at approximately 25,000 feet and descending steadily. She asked how long the pilot had been unresponsive, and Viper replied that it had been about 8 minutes with no response to any of their attempts to establish communication. Sarah quickly analyzed the situation and realized they were running out of time and options. The unconscious pilot's aircraft was on a collision course with one of the most populated areas in Arizona. She asked Viper about the Cessna's fuel situation and whether they had any information about the pilot's medical condition. When he reported that they had no additional details, Sarah began formulating a plan that would require precise coordination between the F-16 pilots and exceptional flying skills. She explained to Viper that they needed to force the Cessna to change course without causing it to crash or break apart in flight. This would require the F-16 to use its wake turbulence to gently push the smaller aircraft away from populated areas toward open desert where it could crash safely without killing innocent people. The maneuver was incredibly dangerous and had never been attempted in a real emergency situation, but it was their only option short of shooting down the aircraft. As Sarah outlined the complex procedure over the radio, everyone in the cockpit of Flight 447 listened in amazement. Captain Wright and First Officer Torres exchanged glances, realizing they had a genuine military hero sitting in their cockpit. The woman they had assumed was just another passenger was calmly directing a life-or-death operation involving fighter jets and a runaway aircraft. Viper acknowledged Phoenix's plan and began maneuvering his F-16 into position relative to the Cessna. He had complete confidence in her tactical knowledge and flying expertise, having heard stories about her legendary missions throughout his career. Every pilot in the Air Force knew about Phoenix's reputation for pulling off impossible rescues and surviving situations that should have been fatal. Meanwhile, Hawk continued flying escort for the commercial airliner, but he could hear everything that was happening over the radio. When he realized that the famous Phoenix was actually aboard the passenger plane he was protecting, he requested permission to break escort and assist with the Cessna intercept. However, both Phoenix and Viper agreed he should maintain his position with Flight 447 until the immediate crisis was resolved. The passengers on the commercial flight had no idea that the quiet woman from seat 14C was now directing a complex military operation from their cockpit. They continued staring out the windows at the F-16 flying alongside them, worried about what kind of emergency could require military escort but completely unaware that one of the Air Force's most decorated combat pilots was sitting just a few rows away from them. Sarah continued providing tactical guidance to Viper as he approached the runaway Cessna. She warned him about the precise positioning required to use wake turbulence effectively without causing the smaller aircraft to go into an uncontrollable spin. The margin for error was incredibly small, and one mistake could result in the immediate destruction of the Cessna and the death of its unconscious pilot. As Viper began the dangerous maneuver, Sarah monitored his progress and provided real-time corrections to his approach angle and airspeed. Her calm, authoritative voice guided him through each step of the unprecedented rescue attempt. The F-16 pilot followed her instructions precisely, trusting completely in her expertise and experience even though they had never worked together before in this type of situation. The wake turbulence from Viper's F-16 began affecting the Cessna's flight path, gradually pushing it away from the populated areas toward the open desert. Sarah watched the small aircraft's movement carefully and adjusted her instructions to Viper to ensure the course change was smooth and controlled. After several tense minutes, the Cessna was successfully diverted to a heading that would take it over uninhabited land where it could crash safely if the pilot remained unconscious. With the immediate threat to civilian lives eliminated, Denver Center began coordinating with emergency services on the ground. Medical helicopters and rescue teams were dispatched to the projected crash site, prepared to provide immediate assistance to the unconscious pilot once his aircraft went down. The coordination was flawless, a testament to the training and professionalism of everyone involved in the operation. As the crisis reached its resolution, Viper came back on the radio with a request that surprised everyone listening. He asked Denver Center for permission to perform an aerial salute to honor Phoenix's service and her crucial assistance in saving lives during the emergency. This was an extremely rare military tradition, typically reserved for fallen comrades or retiring generals, but Viper felt that Phoenix's reputation and her performance during this crisis warranted such recognition. Denver Center approved the request, understanding the significance of the gesture. Hawk was given permission to break escort and join Viper for the salute formation. The two F-16s moved into position above and to both sides of the commercial airliner, preparing to execute a precision flyby that would honor one of the Air Force's most respected combat veterans. Inside Flight 447, Captain Wright announced over the intercom that the passengers were about to witness something very special. He explained that the military pilots had requested permission to perform an aerial salute in honor of one of their fellow service members who had provided critical assistance during the emergency. What he didn't initially reveal was that this honored service member was sitting right there in their cockpit. The passengers pressed their faces to the windows as the two F-16s moved into perfect formation and executed a flawless aerial salute. The fighter jets flew in precise synchronization, their movements coordinated down to the split second. It was a breathtaking display of piloting skill and military tradition that none of the civilian passengers had ever seen before. As the salute concluded, Captain Wright made another announcement that stunned everyone aboard the aircraft. He revealed that the aerial salute had been performed in honor of Major Sarah Phoenix Chin, one of the most decorated fighter pilots in United States Air Force history, who happened to be traveling as a passenger on their flight today. The woman in seat 14C, who had seemed like any other business traveler, was actually a genuine war hero who had just helped save countless lives on the ground. The transformation in the cabin was immediate and dramatic. Passengers who had been making small talk with Sarah about mundane topics suddenly realized they had been sitting next to someone who had risked her life defending their country in aerial combat missions around the world. The quiet, unassuming woman they had barely noticed was actually a living legend among military aviators. Mr. Thompson, who had been complaining about his boring insurance job, looked at Sarah with new understanding and deep respect. Lisa Martinez, who had apologized for her noisy child, realized that this woman had probably faced challenges and pressures that made a fussy toddler seem like nothing at all. Flight attendant Jenny, who had served Sarah water and made casual conversation, now understood she had been speaking with someone who had served her country with extraordinary distinction and bravery. As Sarah returned to her seat, the entire cabin watched her with a mixture of awe, respect, and curiosity. Some passengers wanted to shake her hand or thank her for her service. Others simply stared, trying to reconcile the ordinary-looking woman they had ignored with the extraordinary military hero she actually was. A few people asked for autographs or wanted to take pictures with her, though Sarah politely declined most of these requests. The remainder of the flight passed in a completely different atmosphere than the first half had. Passengers spoke in hushed, reverent tones about the aerial salute they had witnessed and the presence of a genuine war hero among them. Sarah tried to return to her magazine, but found it impossible to regain the anonymity she had enjoyed earlier in the flight. Her cover was blown, and there was no going back to being just another passenger in seat 14C. When Flight 447 finally landed in Phoenix, word of the incident had already spread through social media and news networks. Cameras and reporters were waiting at the gate, hoping to interview the legendary pilot who had helped resolve the midair crisis. Airport security had to escort Sarah through the terminal to protect her from the growing crowd of people who wanted to meet her or simply catch a glimpse of the famous Phoenix. As Sarah walked through the airport, she reflected on the irony of the situation. She had boarded the flight hoping for a quiet, anonymous trip to visit her sister. Instead, she had ended up directing a complex rescue operation from 35,000 feet and receiving an unprecedented aerial salute from her fellow fighter pilots. Her attempt to blend in as an ordinary passenger had been completely destroyed, but she had to admit there was something satisfying about using her skills to help save lives once again. The incident became national news within hours, with video of the aerial salute being broadcast on television stations across the country. Military aviation experts praised the innovative rescue technique that had been employed to divert the runaway Cessna, and Sarah found herself reluctantly thrust back into the spotlight she had been trying to avoid. In the days that followed, Sarah received commendations from Air Force leadership and requests for interviews from news organizations around the world. The woman who had wanted nothing more than to be a normal passenger on a normal flight had become the center of a story that captured the public imagination and reminded everyone of the dedication and skill of the men and women who serve in the military. But perhaps most importantly, the unconscious pilot of the Cessna survived his emergency landing in the desert and made a full recovery after receiving prompt medical attention. Sarah's quick thinking and expertise had not only prevented a potential catastrophe in downtown Phoenix but had also saved the life of a fellow aviator who had found himself in an impossible situation through no fault of his own. The story of the passenger in seat 14C became a legend in military aviation circles, retold in pilot lounges and training facilities as an example of how skills learned in combat could be applied to save lives in unexpected circumstances. For Sarah Chin, it was just another day of service to her country, even though she had been trying to take a day off from being Major Phoenix Chin and just be a regular person taking a regular flight to visit family.